right, welcome to another episode of Streaming Clouds. As always, thank you for tuning in. Kev, what are we up to today, man?
So today, this is the second stream of the week. I feel like we're ramming in lots of content this year before the year out, right? We've got all sorts of folks on, but yeah, today again, just before we kick off, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe to the channel. But today is all about the cloud adoption framework, and in particular, the Azure cloud adoption framework, right? So we've obviously gone out and tried to find the best person to speak about this. So we reached out to technical product manager at Microsoft, Jeff Mitchell. So round of applause for Jeff. Robin, please, quick.
Wow.
And today we're going to talk about we're going to start right at the beginning, right? Because most of the time when we run these shows, we talk about the technical elements, right, and the deployment. So we will touch on Azure landing zones, but we've got separate sessions for them. Today is making sure we get our strategy right, and we're having the right conversations internally with our customers or externally with customers as well. So Jeff, do you just want to give a brief introduction about yourself and some background?
Hey, yeah, sure. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, so I started off in technology when really we were just starting off with virtualizing servers. I'd say like version 1.5, 2.0 of ESXi, right? And when Hyper-V was a thought to be foundationally created, and kind of worked my way up in IT through worked at a couple of different Microsoft Gold managed service providers. And help build out practices for Azure solutions, Azure managed services, Office 365, and then joined Microsoft and their partner team before joining the worldwide group and our solutions engineering team, focusing on the strategy around cloud option framework, well-architected framework, and Azure landing zones. We work with our customers to really understand the challenges that they have with cloud adoption and help them to operationalize their platform as quickly as possible.
Awesome. I know me and Jeff have worked together for over a year now, right, on and off, and I like Jeff's approach of trying to bring in the real world experiences, right, to try and help our customers because he's been through the pain himself, right? So, no, I think this is going to be a good session. So, should we get this show on the road and let's get kicked off and maybe an introduction into the cloud adoption framework and where we're up to?
All right. Let's get up your screen, right?
Yeah.
There we go.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. So the cloud option framework is designed to help customers know how to bring their resources and bring their IT investments to the cloud. So it encompasses people, process, and tools, and has strategic guidance and actionable guidance for our customers to plan their cloud adoption process, right? So when you look at the guidance that we have within the cloud adoption framework, it's very much there to help you focus on what are the success patterns we've learned from our partners, the success patterns we've learned from our customers, and from engaging, internally with our own cloud services, right? So if you think about the experience that Microsoft has gone through with adopting our own cloud managed services as well as our platform, right? So in this journey, there's at the start of it, we kind of explain within the cloud adoption framework how you should approach identifying what your strategy is going to be, right? And so in the strategy section, we talk a lot about identifying where your business drivers are for cloud adoption. We talk about this all the time, and I kind of broke my teeth first coming into IT on IT business management. IT is there to provide value to the business. And so the real goal of what we're enabling with cloud adoption is we're identifying what are the strategies for our business that are in adopting cloud are going to drive an impact to that business, right? And so the strategy section is to help you understand what is the impact to the business that you're driving and what are the applications in your portfolio that you're going to bring to the cloud with what level of high availability, and what level of resiliency, cost optimization do you need to do that? And at the same time, as you're working through that strategy and defining that strategy, you establish who are going to be your stakeholders and your key team that's going to help with the adoption and operations of the cloud. And so that's all identified in this first methodology called strategy. And strategy goes through these business outcomes, financial considerations. And so what you'll notice inside of the cloud adoption framework is that there are several methodologies, and each methodology is meant to encompass a set of guidance that will help you take your cloud adoption and iterate on where you are today. So not all customers are greenfield in there, what we traditionally call greenfield. They're in Azure today. Some customers already have Azure. They just started with what they adopted a service, they followed service guidance, and they put Azure Migrate in place. And so they started migrating resources. They didn't go through the stages of the CAF. So the cloud option framework can meet you not only if you're starting off new in greenfield, but also if you're brownfield and you already have existing resources and you're trying to find, how do I ideate on, for example, my security baseline or my identity baseline? How do I govern my environment? So each one of these methodologies provides you with guidance specifically on this process. And what we typically see, excuse me for a second while I pull up a PowerPoint. I'll only use one slide out of it. But what we typically see here is that customers are iterating in their cloud environments where they're bringing people and documentation through to tools that then help them execute, and then they're putting best practices in place, and that establishes this baseline. And once that baseline is in place, then they're gonna reevaluate, right? And they really want to optimize on the ability to iterate in the cloud. And so each one of these methodologies in CAF helps you define your strategy, plan actionable insights and adopting. So once you have that portfolio, once you've gone through and you're defined your strategy in your plan section, you're going to complete an assessment of the environment that you have, right? You're going to understand what are all the resources and applications that you have in your IT portfolio in your business. And then in the ready methodology, you're going to go ahead and deploy some resources in Azure. That's where the Azure landing zone comes in place, right? The landing zone for your platform by which all application landing zones will reside inside of. Then once you become ready, it's time to adopt. You've got your platform landing zone in place. You have your baseline for governance, for security, for identity. It's time to start migrating and innovating applications. And then you'll see that there's govern, manage, and there should also be security, which is a new methodology that we just launched on the bottom. And the govern, manage, and security methodologies are the methodologies that you're gonna go through and reiterate on, right? So you're gonna have an iterative process of investing in those. So the documentation in CAF really helps us go through each one of these methodologies and help kind of guide you through where the investments are in your business.
No, I really like that. I mean, I always use. I've told Jeff this story before. So when I was a customer, the guidance wasn't there, right? And exactly what you just said, Jeff. We brought resources into Azure and we organically grew. And in the end, I was backing myself into a corner, right? Being that I couldn't scale, or I was running out of my network topology wasn't right, or whatever, or the strategy of the business. So what the business thought it was getting and what was being deployed were two separate things, right? So like you said, we build stuff because it needs to be consumed, right? By our internal customers and stakeholders, or if we're retail, or we've got external customers that are consuming our services. So getting this bit right will really help and set you up for success. And it's a great starting place, even like you said, even if you're greenfield, or even if you're like a mature customer as well, right? So you're looking at, well, what does good look like? I need a helping hand.
Yeah, and I think, one of the places I'll just point out here in the ready methodology is a place called Cloud Operating Model. And in this section, we talk about different operating models that businesses have. And so the common operating models that we see here across decentralized operations, centralized operations, enterprise operations, and distributed operations, right? These are different types of organizational structures within a business to deliver IT. And so some customers deliver in decentralized operations, some deliver in enterprise operations, but oftentimes you are transitioning and looking at going to a different operational model. Those customers who are in decentralized operations, there will become a tipping point in the business in which now they start saying, how do we move to central operations, right? And what do the roles look like based upon our portfolios and responsibilities. And so that's one of the places, like as IT changes and as the customer's cloud adoption increases, right, is how do our teams align in the business to these outcomes? So the identifying that early on in your strategy and plan phase can help you understand who's going to have what responsibility. One of the really great resources that I always point folks to who are in the strategy plan phase is our strategy plan phase template. And so this is, just a Word document that helps you identify who has the executive stakeholder sponsorship within the business for the cloud adoption. And also it helps you identify what are the KPIs and the measures of success that you're going to have in the business for this cloud adoption, for the applications you're bringing, what's the expected outcomes, right? And then you get into like business justification. And this section in the middle here is something that I think every business goes through at some point when you're looking at cloud adoption, which is the assessment, right? Understanding, we have Azure Migrate, which you can deploy via agentless or agent, and you deploy it into your environment. You get some statistics back on what hosting this in Azure, what the cost would be, what types of disks that you would need to use are, right? We even have the like an application dependency mapper, right, which is basically an agent that looks at the applications on the virtual machine and sees where is it communicating in the environment, and we'll say, okay, we believe that this application is talking on these protocols to these other machines. So there's a dependency matrix that can be built as well. So the assessment here of listing out each application that you have, who owns the business unit, what is its what is the RTO and the RPO objective, right? This really helps you that, once you get to the ready phase and you put your landing zone in place and now you're going to migrate and adopt and you need to bring these applications and you start looking at, well, how much should we put in place, backup, BCDR, business resiliency, business continuity plan in place for these applications. If you haven't documented it in the start, then you have to go back, and it takes time, and it slows down your cloud adoption because you didn't have that information to begin with. So this sort of strategy plan template is highly effective at making sure that you've touched off on kind of those key indicators, leading indicators in your cloud adoption, and you have a good defined approach.
I mean, that's an awesome document, right? So, like, even for technical resources that may be trying to advocate this, right, to the business, like that's like like you said, like an overall document where it's also got the technical elements, right, from a high level, but then it's also got like the business outcomes as well, right, which is great for leadership.
What I love about the framework is that it sets you up for success, right? Because you only have usually one shot to do it right. And otherwise, because I've seen a lot of environments where they didn't really plan and thought about like naming conventions, labeling, cost control, which regions, networking, all the fundamental components, and then eventually they call in a couple of consultants, well, me, right, to fix everything, and you were like, this is gonna be painful, right? Because you cannot just suddenly move things around. You can migrate things from subscription to subscription, but not everything, allows you to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So then it becomes really complex, and then you regret not using a framework like this from the beginning, right?
Yeah, setting those expectations with leadership, right? Managing up as well as the way that they manage down. Everyone contributes in success, right, across the board when it comes to the business impact and the outcome, right, of cloud adoption. And so this kind of helps level set across the business, the purpose, right, the sponsorship of the investment. And so as you get to implementing your governance in place, and you have stakeholders within your governance team that understand the governance role distribution, right, between if you think about financial ops, that starts to come in place here, right? So as you have finished your assessment and your plan, you understand your resources. Now you go back to the financial operations team, FinOps team, and you say, hey, we're going to run these reports, and it looks like, this is what the cost is going to be in the cloud, and this is what our data storage is going to be, and so it allows you to have those conversations up front and bring in security early and often, right? So, in any cloud adoption process, typically security, identity, and networking are the places where you spend the most time in ensuring that you've got a good foundational approach. And so by doing that up front, documenting what those requirements are up front, it can really help you go fast and go far, right? By having the whole team have an understanding of what those requirements are.
Yeah, awesome framework, right? And all the steps, how they're laid out, it really guides you, right? And with these huge migrations or migrations in general, usually people start already migrating. You're like, wait a minute, right? What are you migrating? Are we taking care of all the foundational resources, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Is it sustainable, that kind of thing, right? Because you want to be able to scale, right? This is like the first step.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and once you've got your plan put in place, you understand what your strategy is, what the business drivers are. Then you say, okay, it's time to get started with platform adoption. It's time to lay down our landing zone. And so that's when we get into the ready methodology for the cloud adoption framework. And so here we talk about, number one, what is your business structure with your cloud operating model? And that's going to be that's going to be the team that operationalizes Azure, right? So in a business, that could be SMC or SMB, it could be one person or a team of people with the same objective, 3 to 5 people, right? Or this could scale up to decentralized IT, where you have subsidiaries that have groups of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 folks that manage subsidiary IT for their group and their business, and then they could report up to a centralized IT, but in most cases they're decentralized, and they all figure out their roles within the corporate structure. And so when it comes to the ready methodology, now that we've made our plan, we understand what our strategy is, the ready methodology is now let's lay down that platform landing zone. Let's democratize our application team so that when they deploy resources into the cloud, they have the built-in security and governance requirements we documented in our strategy and plan process. And that's a guardrails, right? So instead of it being an after fact where you're deploying an application and then you're going back and saying, okay, we need the security team to go review what we deployed and tell us, is there anything that we should change or update here? It's no, we've deployed according to the security requirements that were in our plan and strategy. And now that we've deployed, we've implemented those requirements into guardrails in the Azure environment. So as application teams deploy their resources, they are getting audit compliance, right, through Azure policy. It's providing you with a view of compliance. And then okay, we've met these guardrails, or there's configuration changes that we need to make. And so the ready portion is now getting ready, deploying that application, or deploying that platform landing zone. And, in this same context, some customers already have landing zones. Some customers are starting greenfield and they need to deploy them new. So we have sections within the Azure Landing Zone guidance. So the first section here, all the way up to implementation options, is all when the customer is on you're starting your journey, right? You're starting with your cloud adoption. So maybe you want to you're designing your architecture for your platform landing zone. So you can go in and review the guidance that we have for each one of the design areas. Most customers are going to want to say, Microsoft, you have best practices, so let's just adopt your best practices. So we do provide accelerators. We have an accelerator for customers to operate in the portal, right? So if they are early in their business development or in their IT teams, they don't have the capability for infrastructure as code. That's why we have the portal experience in Azure. So you can deploy Azure landing zones with a portal experience, but then we also have Azure Bicep for those who do have infrastructure as code capability, and Terraform. So you deploy your landing zone for your platform. Now you have the guardrails in place and you can build out your applications teams. And so the ready methodology is that process by which you're setting up your platform landing zone and getting ready for applications that you're going to bring into it.
I heard you use the term guardrails a couple of times, and I love that analogy. Can you explain a little bit more why these guardrails are so important?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robin. I think when we were working as a team and the team was putting together the architecture for Azure Landing Zone, you have to do so with some principles in place, right? So you can design architecture. It's typically when we talk about information technologies, the field, we talk about science, art, right, and logic. Science, art, and logic is like the mix of our field and what we work on, right? And so from the art perspective, the principles of Azure Landing Zone help us to implement architecture in a way that I think what you called out, Kevin, earlier, right, is that we're not designing with a cliff. And so we could accidentally design architecture that creates cliffs where now if you want to make any changes or you want to scale out or scale in, you have to go and redesign the whole architecture, right? And so fundamentally, we created principles for the Azure landing zone. And one of those principles, right, I talked a little bit about subscription democratization, the idea that subscriptions are units of measurement and they help us to scale and accelerate application portfolio management, right? So I'm not saying that every subscription is an application. I'm not saying that all applications go into a subscription. I'm not saying that a application spans across multiple subscriptions. Those are all viable options, right? We're not locking ourselves in, and by making this principle, we can help facilitate all those examples, right? Because there can be use cases for each one of those examples. And one of those, right, Robin, where you pointed out was policy-driven governance. These are what we do is we use Azure Policy to implement guardrails in the environment. So, for example, the Azure Security Benchmark, which is now Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, we implement that at the top level of the management group. And we believe that that's the baseline of security in the Azure environment. Another thing that we do is Microsoft Defender for Cloud is enabled at the top level, right? So any resources that are deployed, the policy will pick up, hey, this resource needs Defender for Cloud. Hey, this resource is compliant or non-compliant. So I'm just going to show you guys, right? I'm going to jump over here to my management group structure. We look at Azure landing zones. I've got deployed here in this demo tenant. Oh, hold on a second. I realized that may be super small.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that.
There you go. So I'm looking here at my management group structure for my Azure landing zones, and I'll just go to the top, what we call intermediate root management group. This is what I would call like my company, Contoso or Wingtip, or for me, Dr. Strange School of the Mystic Arts. So this is the management group, the top level, of my company, what my company is. And what I could do is I could go and look at my policies and see that, like we were talking about earlier, that Azure Security Benchmark, right? Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. I can see it's not compliant. Now I know why it's not compliant. This is my demo environment. I know what's going on here. First of all, I don't review or reconcile my users in my demo environment very often, and I don't have that separation of highly privileged and administrative users in here. So you can see that that's where I'm not compliant. But if you look at the rest of these rules that are in place from the benchmark, you can see where I've now got the guardrails. And if I were to deploy something that wasn't in alignment, I would then know about it, right? So one of the things that customers told us when we started working on the landing zone is, InfoSec team said, I want to know about the entire inventory in my Azure environment, and I want to know what's compliant and what's not compliant. I want that visibility. I want the assurances, right? And so this helps us with solving that challenge. So I wanted to show that in a little bit more detail. Sorry for kind of jumping ahead on that, but that's the example, right? It's a policy in place, so we have those governance guardrails, Robin.
Awesome.
Yeah, and again, I think it's great to go into the portal as well, Jeff, and just, you got the theory on the docs, but it's even better, right, to show it in the portal, right, and go through where it's actually being used in the practical sense. So that's cool. So what's next? What's the next pillar, so to say, right?
So now we're question.
I do have another question, right?
Go on.
You hear this term like CCOE, right? Cloud Center of Excellence, or an enablement team, or a platform team, or there are different terms that basically mean the same thing or not, depending. It depends, right? But is establishing a CCOE and creating reusable modules and that approach also documented in the Cloud Adoption Framework? Is that somewhere in these steps?
So we call out the CCOE. I think there's a couple of pages on CCOE. I don't know them top of mind to be able to go right to them. What I would say is that Cloud Center of Excellences have become, in our industry, an operational model in and of themselves, right? So when we talk about the cloud operating models, a CCOE would have responsibilities within that matrix. So if I go back to our operating models here in Ready, you'll see that in our operating models, if we go down here into the description of priorities and scope, you'll see that we have some complexity lists here, And then actually we go down here into the accountability and alignment, and you'll see like, hey, yeah, the CCOE is responsible for this. So what I would say is we do have some outliners for what are the responsibilities of a CCO and what they should be accountable within the cloud operating model. But the individual grouping structure of a CCOE is dependent on the style of business, whether you're enterprise, whether you're like a GSI, a global service integration partner, or an ISV. You're going to have different styles for your cloud center of excellence. So we do call out the responsibilities of the cloud center of excellence teams, and then when you actually go to our cloud center of excellence functions, you can see like what are the effects of these teams, what are their responsibilities, right? So you can get deeper into the responsibilities within these teams, and I would say at a introductory level what their what their functions are. And I also want to strongly encourage that everything we do in IT is driven from the business use case. So if we're organizing under CCOE, or we're creating a CCOE or moving to a CCOE style, there should be sponsorship from the leadership team, and we should be creating these roles in alignment to our business outcomes or aligning to teams and application delivery.
Yeah, it's a lot, right? What's being discussed in the cloud adoption framework.
Yeah, that's the thing. If it's not actionable, right? If it's not prescriptive, it'll give you a lot of ideas, like for what you're building. But at the end of the day, you have to implement, your plan. And this is meant to guide you to those decisions, right? So, one of the things I get commonly asked is about the cloud adoption framework, the well-architected framework, Azure Architecture Center, right? And so, the way that in my mind that I visualize what I learned from reading on in the text is that CAF focuses on the broad journey to the cloud, right? It's business elements, it's planning, it's skilling, it's platform operation considerations. The well-architected framework focuses on applications and how do we make a singular workload part of an environment, right? And well-architected focuses on that application design and architecture and principles in and of itself, based upon the technical archetype for the application you're building. And the Azure Architecture Center is comprehensive, actionable repositories of code, right, and architecture guidance in one place. So it's a culmination of resources to help you build architecture. So those three things kind of help you understand that as you're looking at CAF, you're looking at the portfolio and strategy and business down into the platform adoption and applications launching, and then kind of investing, reinventing, and re-architecting those applications. As a well-architected framework comes in and helps you operationalize those applications and increase the resiliency, cost optimization, the operational excellence in that application. And then the Azure Architecture Center is this supplemental resource that has bits of application code that you can pull from and put into your application workloads, right? So in my mind, that's how I organize it. And it really helps me go and look in a specific place for a specific set of guidance.
Yeah, awesome breakdown. We have a question from the audience. Let's see if I can pull it up. Come on, there we go. Hi, Rolf. Yeah, he's here. So, skilling readiness in general is a hard topic when working with customers. They consider themselves more ready than they actually are. Any best practices, methods to measure the required skills?
Great question. What do you think, Kevin?
Well, seeing I do this on a day in, day out, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I think I'm going to say it all depends, right? From a resource point of view. Again, I think it's taking stock of what you're trying to achieve, right? And like we just said there, from a ready and a planning point of view, have we checked every availability? It's hard, right? Because some customers, turn up with schematics, right, of what they want, yeah, and how it's going to happen and everything else, and then you've got to validate those options, right, and give feedback on that. So I'm going to be honest, Rob, that's a very difficult question to ask because I think it's quite wide vary. But I suppose it always comes back to the earlier you engage with the customer and the scenario, the better you're going to be able to provide them the resources and guidance, right, on making an informed decision.
Well, I think like in the cloud option framework, training and skilling comes up in the plan section, right? So if you think about like the process we walk through with the methodologies, when you get to plan, excuse me, when you get to plan, what you're doing then is you're identifying your team, and then you're saying, okay, with what we need to bring to life, the platform operating system, Azure Landing Zones, what do we need to train? How do we need to train our resources, right? So I think of AZ 900, the foundation, Azure Foundations, right? I also think about the DevOps certification. So maybe you get the DevOps certification if you're going to be a infrastructure as code or site reliability engineer for Azure. That's when you're planning is when you identify skill plans. But then to Rolf's point, right, is that like sometimes when you're working with them and asking them questions, you're discovering gap knowledge along the way. And I think that's mostly going to show itself in Ready when you start getting to the, in Azure Landing Zones, we have recommendations and considerations. So if I just open up some of the design area topics we have here, we'll go to identity and access management, and we'll look at landing zones. We have recommendations and considerations, right? So RBAC roles, we need to use RBAC roles, and we need to identify who are going to be our stakeholders for different groups, whether we have platform administrators, whether we have application administrators, NetSecOps, right? When you ask the customer this question and they go, how do we apply roles? We haven't been taught that, or what is a recommended practice for this, right? Is when you identify during the consultation, the assessment of getting ready, okay, now we know that we need to have this conversation. So I feel like, the first way is plan and making sure you've got a good foundational base, and then you're always going to identify gap knowledge. And I think as a program manager, I've learned more of that than when I worked in IT, and I've learned that, hey, planning for filling in gap knowledge in the project implementation phase will help everyone in successful deployment and manageability, because let's face it, none of our success in this career has come from day zero deployments. It's come from day 30, day 60, day 90, 180. Once we've deployed this product and it's been adopted by the customer and it's actually running transactions or it's actually delivering a service, that's when having those gaps clearly understood is going to pay dividends, because your team now knows why a database is relational to, a certain piece of code or storage proc or whatever it may be. Does that make sense? That's how I would swing it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And like touching back on the training, I think that's also like a skills assessment, because this is one stage of it. But how are the teams and the customers that you're going to be working with going to be able to operate Azure moving forward, right? So it's taking stock of that, and like Jeff said, talk about identity or networking, these things are going to come up, and then it's how you handle that, right, with follow-up workshops or signposting to resources, etc.
Yeah, I'm still digesting what has been said.
It's a big subject.
Yeah, man. It is, right? And especially, the whole planning stage, trying to already predict what you're going to be needing in the future, trying to already make, certain decisions based on information you don't really have yet, right? So there are so many variables that you're trying to apply in the best way possible, including also skilling up your staff, right? And usually already have people doing networking, right? So then you should probably skill them on, software-defined networking and networking within Azure, to make sure that they can, lay out the network that they need or that they want, or go for Azure V1, right? That's easy. Yeah. And there I lost my train of thought. But, what I'm trying to point out here is I guess that there are a lot of skill sets that people can reuse in the cloud as well. It's not that they have to relearn something completely new. So then by adding AZ 900 or really specific certifications and learning paths to supplement what they already know with what they need on top of that to be successful within Azure. But how to measure that? Well, that's a whole different story, probably.
Yeah. So, once you have your platform in place, now you start talking about application landing zones, and that's where the adopt phase of Cloud Adoption Framework comes in. So, in the adopt methodology, right, we're looking at applications that we define in our strategy and our plan, and we're planning for them to go into application landing zones in our Azure environment. And we're looking at one of three things. Either we're going to be migrating, it's in some way a lift and shift sort of movement into the cloud, modernizing, which is where we're going to look at that application and how we hosted it on-prem, maybe inside of a virtual machine, and we're going to host it with a platform as a service offering like App Services or Azure Kubernetes Service or Azure Virtual Desktop. And then we have Innovate, where we're going to rethink this application and how we did it on premises and build it in a completely new way in the cloud. And so the adopt phase provides you guidance, on each one of these, and you actually can find like specific guidance for types of application landing zones. We also have, by the way, if you're a customer and you're starting with a specific focus on bringing a workload, we have these scenarios in the Cloud Adoption Framework. So if you're like, you specifically have a Azure VMware solution, or maybe there's data, your cloud analytics and data, you're looking at data landing zones, or maybe something around hybrid and multi-cloud where you want to be able to have visibility. Each one of these SAP is a very clear one here. These actually, when you click on the cloud adoption scenarios, they provide you with CAF specific guidance. So going through and adopting these workloads with respect to that specific application type. So with adopt, you can go through and you can look at the entire phase from a business perspective, or you can go into scenarios. You can say, okay, I'm going to go through my cloud adoption journey for SAP, for example. And then when you go through and on SAP, you see in preparing your environment, there's your Azure. You still have to have that Azure landing zone in place, right? And then you have design area guidance that's specific to specifically SAP. So now we get into considerations around SAP basic teams, how to build out your landscape with your SIDs, and how to organize your SIDs for SAP, right? So you find that there's a couple of different ways when you get to the adopt methodology that you could start with bringing those workloads into the cloud. And then govern, right, is all about, once you've got that governance baseline in place with Azure landing zones, how do we increase that baseline? How do we think about cost and tagging and having each one of the governance pillars around our foundation for visibility into the environment in place, right? And so this not only goes through the basics of governance, which are established in the landing zone, but goes into further detail about additional governance investments that you can make and enhance your landing zone with governance. Same thing with manage, right? It's managed about operationalizing your landing zone in ready. This is now about how do we increase the baseline of our management. So where we were, talking about initial inventory and assessment and visibility from Azure landing zones, how do we increase our inventory and visibility in applications? So if you think about, like, for example, log analytics workspaces in Azure landing zones, we put them in. We have a centralized core log analytics workspace in the management subscription, but maybe application teams need a workspace for specific application views, right? So we start to talk about increasing that management baseline. Same thing for secure. You have a baseline you start with. How do we enhance that? So in Azure landing zones, for the platform landing zone, we have logs that are put in place. Then what you do is you turn on Azure Sentinel, start consuming those logs in Sentinel and getting additional security. So you're enhancing your landing zone with security. So each one of these methodologies is about enhancing, after you get past adopt, is about investing in governance and management and security, right? And enhancing the baseline that you started with for your platform adoption into more detail, into more visibility or more observability, into more security.
That's great. I'm just trying to think back. When you're in the planning stage and you're sort of trying to figure out your outcomes, right? We've got a tool, right, for exporting out to DevOps, right, for milestones. Is that right?
Yeah, so actually in the resources section of CAF, we go into these tools. So you can go and click on tools and templates. And you can see, like in plan, we specifically have a smart strategic migration assessment and readiness toolkit, as well as cloud journey tracker. And these are going to help you to be able to document your journey, right, and then export it out to Azure DevOps or CSV and Excel, and really track along. And there it is, your strategy, plan, governance, DevOps template that you were speaking to, I believe, there, Kevin.
Yeah, I just think it's probably one of the most golden resources that I've seen, right? Sort of, it gives folks a starting place, and also if we're gonna, talk to folks about adopting DevOps as practices, right, or using infrastructure as a code, then we've got a board in there, right, where we can start, assigning tasks to people, and it gets people into the rhythm of, consuming that, right, and working that way as well. So that's what I like about this. There's different areas kickstart you for consuming different work practices or thinking in a different way, right? And I think that's pretty powerful when it comes to, it's the overall journey, not just I need to get a network deployed, right? It's the wider picture
Right.
constantly.
Yeah, I think, for example, one of the resources here is the Azure naming tool. We traditionally think of naming resources as like, oh, well, do you have a prefix, or are you doing suffixes or affixes, right? And prefixes or suffixes. But, a lot of companies have complex naming rules for governance, right? And this Azure naming tool, when you put this in place, it helps you to quickly identify the naming practices that are outlined in CAF. So this is just, you can deploy this as an app service, or I think it's Docker image, or you can host it on your own Apache or web server. And one of the things it does is it'll generate, right, these names for you based upon the Azure resources, and it follows the CAF naming guidelines, right? So when you're stuck in a governance council talking about naming conventions, well, what does CAF say? Let's implement the CAF naming tool and see what the options are that they give us, and move past that blockage that you may have there. And other places, specifically on when you start looking at like, how do we know what roles and how do we know what permissions are put in place? We have a tool called AZ Advertiser, and this tool in the CAF, it's under the govern methodology. This will actually tell you can like go and look at policies, right, and see what are built-in policies that Azure has. One of the things you can do is go in and select actually the Azure landing zone policies in this column here, and you can see what I've done is I now see the 106 policies that we use in Azure landing zones. And I can get an idea of what they do, right? Where their description of them, what they're named, and this gives me like details of my environment and of Azure landing zones. Another thing to point out is that for Azure landing zones specifically, I talked about like we have this portal experience that helps you accelerate your adoption. So you can deploy this Azure landing zone portal accelerator, and this will deploy for companies who don't have infrastructure as code capability. We can go in and we can select our networking and topology and connectivity. So, maybe I'm going to just use Azure Firewall, and I can select my connectivity subscription here. I've got defaults for my routing. So I can customize it if I want, if I know what my network space needs to be, I can customize it, or I can leave it as defaults. And once I select these defaults, once I go to the landing zone configuration, I can actually set up my application landing zone. So I can say yes here. I select AKS demo landing zone, put in my IP addresses for that each landing zone that I want, and I can kind of build out my online and my corporate landing zones for my application teams. So this is all enabled in the portal experience to be able to get started quickly. The other thing is we have Bicep available, right? So if you do have, or you're building infrastructure as code capability and you want to start somewhere, we have the Azure Landing Zone Bicep for reference implementation here. And this Azure Landing Zone Bicep portal, Azure Landing Zone Bicep Accelerator has videos that will help you understand how to deploy, and talks about, I think we've even got a link here to the, sorry for all the movement here, I'll slow down just a little bit, to the deployment flow. And so in the deployment flow, you can actually understand the stages, right, that we're going through and deploying in each stage of the pipeline here, and how the modules align to that. And then we've got a very similar experience for Terraform, the CAF Enterprise Scale Terraform module. We've got examples here listed in our repo, so you can go and see like different models and different examples for customization that you can do with this one as well. So we want to enable with these tools and templates customers to get started quickly.
No, it's great to see the different flavors that we offer. Like you said, the portal, right? If you're just starting out or you don't necessarily have the skills in there. And then, hot topics at the moment, well, continuously hot topics, right? I think we've been talking about them for years, but infrastructure as a code, right? With Bicep and Terraform, whatever an organization's preference is, we've got the language there, right? To help people get that deployed, right? Using pipelines and agile approaches. Awesome sauce.
Awesome.
So
we have another question from the audience.
Oh, another question. Is it for me or is it for Jeff?
Well, it says Kevin though. So
Kevin. It says Kevin.
All right. So Kevin asks, while working on design, subscription are always a tough conversation to have. Companies with a large application portfolio get concerned with subscription sprawl. Any good suggestions addressing these?
Okay. I don't know if Jeff might be able to handle this better, but it's a conversation I seem to have on a daily basis, right? And the same with resource groups. So,
yeah, I think like in my perspective, you definitely want to keep yourself in check because subscriptions are units of management. You want to define as well as possible the relationship that is going to happen with your application portfolio. So the guardrails that we put in place with Azure Policy are meant to help you so that no matter what amount of subscriptions you have, you are going to have consistent governance, security, and visibility into those subscriptions. That being said, you also want to have a basic checklist of who's accountable and who's responsible for those subscriptions so that they serve a purpose, right? And so one of the things that Azure Landing Zones does is it gives you visibility by basis of where those subscriptions are located within your management group structure. So one of the things that I do in our environment, actually, I'll just show that. One of the things that we have in our environment here, let's see. And in my lab environment, right, is that within Azure Landing Zones, there is a sandbox management group, and there's also a decommission management group. So the purpose of the subscription is a unit of management. So what is the life cycle of that subscription? How long is that application going to live? When does that subscription move into a decommission management group? And do I have policies that automatically have Azure Landing Zone policies that automatically will disable that subscription, wait 7 days, and then delete that subscription so that I'm managing the life cycle of the subscriptions themselves, right? So I think of Azure Landing Zones as providing a way for us to say, okay, I have my landing zone subscriptions that are for my applications that live under, Corporate Online. And then when we migrate to, let's say we migrate to a new AKS subscription because we, kind of redid and moved all of our data over because we're doing a new architecture within our AKS environment. We're switching from single tenant to multi-tenant AKS environment, not Azure AKS environment. We're going to have multiple applications in our AKS footprint. So what I do with that old tenant? Well, once I've moved, or that old subscription, once I've moved to the new AKS subscription, the old AKS subscription, I drop into decommission, and then that subscription goes away. So this management style and this management process of managing your subscriptions at scale is really why we want to keep those first two design principles of subscription democratization and creating governance-driven guardrails so that we can have this kind of flexibility in the life cycle of subscription.
So that's the use case of the decommissioned management group, right? Then a policy that manages your life cycle as well. So if I move my subscription to the decommissioned management group, then it will automatically disable the subscription and we'll get rid of it after 7 days? Is that, or that's an example?
Well, that's an example of
Okay.
a policy that you could build. Yeah, I'm not saying that, like, if, for example, in my labs, we have something like that. We have a process where, I have a lab environment that gets built inside of subscriptions, and the subscriptions get dropped into decommission, and then those subscriptions get disabled in 24 hours, and then after 7 days, they get removed from the environment. So that's that kind of automation that I built for my purpose. But a customer can build automation for decommission how they see fit and how they want to. Maybe they'll have some extra data resiliency requirements or extra data privileges that they want to respect right in that space. But I'm just giving an example.
That's a great example. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Jeff, I know we're coming up to wrapping up soon, but I know you're a fan of feedback, right? And input, right, etc., into the either how the bicep or the Terraform modules are consumed, or even the portal. But say, if I wanted to maybe get involved with the, I keep on saying enterprise scale. I need to really get this out of my head because it's called Azure Landing Zones now, right? But say if I, the community calls, etc. Are they still available as resources? Are folks still able to join up?
Yeah, so we can put these notes, with the show. But first thing is, if I go to aka.ms/ALZ/repo, right? So /ALZ/repo on aka.ms. When I go to this repo, the first thing I want to call out is our what's new section in the wiki. So when you're looking for,
Nice.
What's new and our community calls, they're both listed here. So you can go to what's new, find out what's new for this month, and then you go to our community calls. We do have an external community call coming up. We need to get on here, so we'll get that posted. The other thing is feedback. Issues right here. Please let us know your feedback. We live for your feedback. We triage this, go through it as a team on a daily basis. We also have that on Bicep and Terraform. Excuse me. So if I go to the Bicep repo, issues here and issues here on Terraform. You guys know where this stuff is. We love feedback. We'd love to hear from you on these topics. And then on our community calls, we do FAQ just like we're doing right now, where we answer questions live on that call. So this is the best place for updates when it comes to Azure landing zones. When it comes to the Cloud Adoption Framework, hey, look, it's as simple to provide feedback. It's as simple as this little pencil right here. You hit that pencil, and you're going to hit the GitHub, and you're going to be able to submit your feedback right here. So you can go through if there's something that you want to provide feedback on, right? You can just go right here and edit it and provide a PR with your feedback. Same mechanism. So whether it's CAF or Azure Landing Zone, across the board, we live for that feedback. Like Lady Gaga, we live for the applause. So we want to make everybody happy. We want to make sure that we know what your challenges are. And that we can work with you guys and help you with your projects and with your customers.
Amazing. I love that, and it is true. It is true. It's like the more real life input or exposure, it's just going to make it better for everybody, right? Because that's the whole point of the Cloud Adoption Framework, anyway, right? It's for external consumption. So Awesome. Robin, you got anything else you want to add before we get this wrapped up?
Well, maybe we don't have enough time. I think I wanted to know how. I was thinking about how did the whole CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework, came into existence, right? It started somewhere, and it's now an extensive framework, with loads of information, all these tools. It's ever evolving. There are Bicep accelerators, Terraform accelerators, right? It's a really mature resource, but it still gets better over time if you see what's being added, etc. But it started somewhere, and that's just popped up in my mind. Like, okay, where did it start?
I don't know where it started. Well, I know the team that it started with our Azure marketing team and our content and learning team. But I would say that there are a lot of adoption frameworks in our industry, and it seems like all of them came from the original Gartner's 5 Rs. When Gartner put out a report on the 5 Rs of refactoring, redeploying, retiring, there were like five. It's called the 5 Rs. Gartner put out this report, and then it seems like other adoption frameworks were built around that, and then that's when things really took off. And I think the Azure Landing Zone Cloud Adoption Framework, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, was about 3-4 years after the 5 Rs were deployed or were published by Gartner. So maybe as an industry that helps with my point of view on it for perspective.
Yeah, 5 Rs. Yeah. There are now 6 or 7 even. That's also evolving, right?
It depends on who's talking about it now.
Yeah, awesome. No, Kev, that's it, man. I'm still digesting everything. It's an awesome resource, and I love how Jeff took us through everything. So that was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Jeff's approach of how he structured it out as well. Like, I know folks are going to be like replaying this video constantly, like, just to help them with their deliveries or their engagements. I mean, it's going to be a great resource for folks to use, right, on helping people out, right, adopt Azure. So again, Jeff, you've been a trooper today. I know you weren't 100%, but he still came on the show and he delivered an excellent workshop, right? So, round of applause for Jeff, please.
Thank you, guys. It's been great. It's been great to join you. Looking forward to the future too, and what we can do now together.
Oh yeah, we've got a couple coming up. We're trying to lock down some of the members of the customer architecture and engineering team, right, to come on as well. So there's one big happy family. But yeah. Thanks for the feedback. Great session. So yeah, again, if you like what you're seeing, you want me and Robin to carry on trying to bring these great guests, right, to the show, don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, don't forget to hit us up on the community, right, on the Discord channel, as we have, there's loads of folks on there, right, that are like-minded as well. So again, thanks again for Jeff for coming on, and we'll catch you next time.
Absolutely. Don't be a stranger. Bye.
Don't be a stranger. Bye-bye.